to acknowledge with gratitude that CIC Waterloo is located on the traditional territory of the Etaliatory, also known as Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, which is situated on the Haldeman Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. This evening, we have a very distinguished panel, and the panel will be moderated by Kevin Tur, who is the Vice President of Data and Advanced Technology at Communitech. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Excellent. Thanks, Laszlo, and thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. We do have an exciting topic and panel to deal with and to work our way through. So give me just a moment to set the stage for the discussion, and then we'll get right into it. One thing that I think we can all agree on is that the sudden and resounding shock of COVID-19 pandemic has radically accelerated the use of digital technologies. And this rapid adoption has exposed gaps, revealed weaknesses, and spotlighted critical issues such as cybersecurity, privacy, and resilience in our digital infrastructure. But it has also uncovered significant opportunity. And the thing about this is that no one is immune. Governments, companies, organizations, individuals need to carefully consider the opportunities and threats, as both will directly influence the level of trust we could collectively afford these technologies. And the analysis matters because these technologies, including 5G, will be key determinants of economic growth, company competitiveness, and organizational capacity for innovation at a global scale across diverse fields, including logistics and transportation, lights out manufacturing, autonomous vehicles, mining, construction, and smart grids. And to this end, we have assembled an expert panel to help us work our way through this topic and develop a better understanding of the relevant issues. So we have a very distinguished group of panelists and speakers tonight. We will start with a keynote overview by Melissa Hathaway, whom I will introduce in just a moment. But we will also hear after Melissa's keynote from the rest of our expert panelists, who include Professor Florian Kerschbaum. He's the Executive Director of the Waterloo Cybersecurity and Privacy Institute at the University of Waterloo. Rod Wilson, who is a Chief Technologist, Research Networks, Siena and Ottawa. And Dr. John Lindsay, Assistant Professor of the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. We will also, after we've heard from our keynote and our expert panel, will give you, the audience, an opportunity to weigh in with your questions. There is a Q&A function in Zoom, so I would encourage you to place your questions, type your questions into that Q&A facility, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can at the appropriate time in the agenda. All right, and now turning back to Melissa Hathaway. Melissa is a leading expert in cyberspace policy, cybersecurity, enterprise risk management, and technology assessments. Melissa is globally recognized as a thought leader, having spent the last decade advising institutions and governments such as the UN, NATO, the ITU, and the OAS. She teaches at universities around the world and leads initiatives at internationally recognized think tanks. One of those think tanks is Waterloo Center for International Governance Innovation. Ms. Hathaway served in 2 US presidential administrations, where she spearheaded the cyberspace policy review for President Obama and led the comprehensive national cybersecurity initiative for President George W. Bush. She provides strategic advice to public and private companies, helping them better understand the intersection of government policy, technological and industry trends, and economic drivers that impact acquisition and business development strategy. Thanks for joining us, Melissa. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. It's so nice to be here, and I want to thank the Canada International Council and the U.S. Embassy and Consulate General for inviting me to be here. And so I'd like to just start to talk about the digital economy and 5G. And as we have, the pandemic really has accelerated our digital transformation in our homes and in our businesses and around the world. And today the global economy is about a little over $100 trillion, and the digital economy represents a little over 15% of that, that total value. And the digital economy is powered by telecommunications. It's the largest contributor, and no wonder, because it is what is enabling us to have the flow of data, goods, services, and capital across our borders. That core infrastructure is powering our digital transformation. In Canada, Stats Canada did a study that was just recently published that talked about the digital transformation of Canada over the last decade. And it showed that its digital economy is growing faster and across multiple accounts, faster in Ontario and Quebec and in British Columbia. What does faster mean? It's growing at almost 40%. And it's growing faster than the mining industry, than oil and gas, and transportation and warehousing. And it represents a little, almost 6% of Canada's economy at this point in time. On March 11th, we had a digital transformation with the COVID pandemic, and the world really collided with the digital platforms, and that they are essential to our businesses. That represents about a 1,200% increase in online gaming, 1,200% increase in collaboration tools like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and WebEx, and all of the things that are connecting us, like we're using here this evening. 150% in gaming increase, and then another 50% in for all of us who are watching our online videos. We're using new tools that are transforming our lives on a regular basis. So when you think about that technology path evolution and you talk about 5G, we need to look at where we came from. 1G was that analog line that allowed us to make voice phone calls. And then 2G allowed us to start to send text messages. That was actually prototyped in Finland and then executed around the world. 3G allowed us to connect to the internet and the internet services, and 4G allowed for us to enable video and video streaming to our devices. And now 5G is going to enable us to see a new networked infrastructure that's really powered by software. We're going to see the network functions virtualized, and we're going to be seeing this be a software-based network. What does that get us? That gets us a 5 gigabits per second target. Right now, we're at a much lower rate of downloads and uploads, but a high-speed downlink would allow you to do virtual reality, augmented reality, starting to see live streaming to your phones, and many other services that's going to enable us for both the citizen-facing services and core infrastructures. It's a smart device to a radio technology, to the network, to the core, and then to our broader things. As we start to see what is the difference between 5G and 4G, there's no longer a distinction between the networks and 5G. 4G was a communication from the core to your device. And now in 5G, it's the core through data networks and other providers and to the edge. Really, 4G was just from my infrastructure to your device, and 5G is going to be my infrastructure to your data, to your critical infrastructure, to your home. And it's completely entangled with those critical infrastructures and data sets. When we start to move to 5G over the next 3 to 5 years, and we start to see that adoption, you're going to see an exponential difference for connected devices. Today in our 4G, if you look at just a 1 kilometer radius around Toronto, we have about 50 to 75,000 devices that can connect to the network. That's all that can be supported in a 4G network. When we move to a 5G network, we're going to see 1 million devices that'll be able to connect at 10 times the capacity. Again, we'll start to see this emerge here in our cities, and they'll start to see adoption and embedding this 5G technology, and it'll start to roll out really in the next year to 2 years. By 2023, we should start to see some 5G networks in our cities and in our infrastructures. 5G is going to enable low latency and high-speed networks. And that's essential for the Internet of Things. My computer is going to lag. And the industrial Internet of Things. And we might need Dana to bring up my slides. And within that, you'll start to see China, Estonia, Japan, South Korea, Sweden, and Turkey are all actually deploying and starting to have an uptake of 5G technologies around the world. As we start to go forward, the Internet of Things, Dana, if you can pull up my slides, that would be great. Dana? Here, let me try again. No.
I have your slides if you'd like me to turn them on.
Yep, that would be great.
No worries.
Okay, so high-speed, low-latency networks, and they're essential for the Internet of Things. And as you start to move to the Internet of Things, if you could go to the next slide, we are going to start to connect almost 127 devices per second will start to move. The Internet of Things is connecting people, places, and things. And every electronic device that you buy on the market today is going to have an Internet protocol associated with it. And as we start to move to advancing and transforming our manufacturing, we'll start to see an industrial Internet of Things emerge. Next slide. It's going to enable us to move from a connectivity infrastructure and pave the way for new services and products. And that's going to be everything from what we've traditionally used over the last decade, where we're very familiar with e-banking and e-finance and things like that, and even e-shopping as we've continued along those lines. But now, even though the technology existed, we didn't really adopt it. But today, because of COVID and other things, we're starting to see more e-health, remote monitoring of patients and records. We're starting to see remote actual doctor's visits. And you're going to see in the future, we're going to start to see remote surgeries that are going to happen over the internet through different facilities in remote areas. You already are starting to see smart energy grids deployed in Canada and elsewhere, and that's going to allow for a utility transformation, renewable energy, and distribute new power to different provinces, both traditional energy and renewable energy. And you can actually create the smart grid of giving power from your house through solar panels and wind onto the grid. I have friends in Europe that are actually making money as they are actually deploying onto the smart grid and creating that energy. We're going to see factories of the future that are going to be powered by robots, and we're going to see new media entertainment with more streaming of movies and games to our devices in the future. And we're going to see new sets of transport. All of this and the Internet of Things and the industrial Internet of Things are going to be highly dependent upon these high-speed, low-latency networks of 5G. As we move forward, I wanted to talk about a few use cases. So the next slide. It talks to the fact that we're already starting to see smart agriculture deployed in Canada. Currently, the agriculture represents almost 7% of Canada's GDP. And you're going to start to see IP devices deployed in the crops to measure the water and to measure the chemical needs, as well as you're going to see IP devices put on our cattle and on our hogs in order to actually get to a supply chain of from farm to table, and being able to validate that supply chain of what food they ate, what water did they drink, where did they graze, etc. Canada is the 5th largest exporter of agri-food, and this is a key part of where they're going to be modernizing this key sector of Canada's economy. As we move on to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about driverless transportation and the autonomous vehicles that we expect to hit our roads. We're going to see the IP devices in our cars. We're going to see autonomous cars. And the IP devices in this enabled enhanced logistics is not only going to give us what we currently have in our cars of GPS navigation, roadside assistance, but we're also going to see automatic crash notification, real-time weather updates to our vehicles. We're also going to be notified when another vehicle is too close or other users on the road. And road infrastructure like traffic lights, or when there might be a pothole under repair ahead of us. It won't just be the device that's in your car that is going to be your car it's going to be alerting. We're also going to see, as we move to the next slide, advanced manufacturing. You know, as Ontario is the largest manufacturing base and has such a large research and development area for the country, you're going to see the largest concentration of robotics and automation firms in all of Canada here in Ontario are going to be leveraged. You're going to see the more than 350 companies ranging from Autodesk to Siemens to ABB and Universal Robotics to be looking at and adopting this technology and potentially giving us lights out factories and enabling us to modernize our automotive industry, our food manufacturing, chemicals, metals, machinery, etc. And then we're also going to see smart cities moving out and in Canada. So as you move to the next slide, these smart cities are bringing smart ideas and making them into practical plans. And Canada has recently did a 5G city challenge where there were multiple entrants into applying the digital technology to empower and connect our communities. And Bridgewater received a grant to help enable and reduce energy poverty. The city of Guelph is creating a circular food economy. And the city of Montreal was given a $50 million grant to improve mobility and access to food. So you're going to see multiple cities and smart cities emerge in Canada. As we move to the next slide, it's going to generate, and this 5G, this digital economy is going to generate nearly $13 trillion of economic opportunity by 2035. So it's no wonder that our countries are all talking about how fast can we get to this 5G infrastructure. It's going to enable our competitiveness. It's going to enable our digital transformation. And it's going to really boost our digital economy and make it a larger part of our GDP. Our next slide talks to our countries and our companies are racing to capture that digital opportunity. If we delay some of these deployments, our companies fear that they will be less competitive than other countries where the deployments are moving out quickly or where governments are investing in the build out of that infrastructure, like in the countries that I mentioned earlier. So we need to talk about, moving forward, the technologies that are really powering 5G. And on the next slide, we talk about that there are really 5 key equipment providers that we have as our current choices for providing us this 5G network. We have Ericsson, who's based in Sweden, headquartered in Sweden, Nokia, that's headquartered in Finland, Samsung, that's headquartered in South Korea, and Huawei and ZTE, that are, of course, headquartered in China. We're talking about that these are the key dependent technologies, and we as governments and we as industry want to make sure that we have choice in the technologies that are going to power the 5G infrastructure and power our digital economy and critical infrastructures. Next slide. So when we start to think about that we've got a very limited supply chain currently for 5G equipment, only 5 providers, it starts to bring about this supply chain dependency that our countries are beginning to be worried about. Again, as we talked about from 4G, 4G was a network that really communicated from the core to the device only. And 5G is a network that is going to be software defined network that's going to be continually updated, and that is going to be entangled and commingled with our data and our critical infrastructures. It will connect the people, places, and things seamlessly and entangled across that infrastructure. And so we are worried about the risks to that. How do I protect my data? How do I ensure the continuity of my critical infrastructure as it's powered by 5G? Currently, 5G standards have security as an option, not as a mandate. So how do we start to address this for all vendors of ensuring that we have the continuity, reliability, availability of this infrastructure, and the confidentiality of our data as we're moving forward? There have been a number of reviews being conducted around the world to how do we mitigate the risks of these technologies. And I'm going to start with, the next slide, is the UK. The UK has been doing a telecom supply chain review for more than the last several years. And they're looking at what are high-risk vendors and what are, and how are we going to think about as what vendors are going to have access and being able to provide the technology to our key companies and the core of our critical infrastructures. And a few months ago, the British decided that they were going to limit any high-risk vendor could only have 35% of access to its core network, and that they were increasingly becoming worried about Huawei's technologies based on the security reviews that they have been doing and the engineering reviews that they have been doing over their inspection center in the United Kingdom. And they've been asking the Huawei to address these deficiencies in their audits of the network engineering and the software engineering principles of their core equipment. And recently, the UK has decided that they are going to undertake a secondary review and that they might completely phase out the Huawei technology from their network by 2023. Moving on to the next slide, at the same time, they said, well, you know what, because we're very worried about the fact that we only have a few vendors that were available to provide us this 5G equipment, currently only 5, that perhaps we should work with our other democratic allies. And so the G7 plus South Korea, India, and Australia that represent a very large market demand and research and development and innovation centers. And can we actually, as an alliance, start to work on potential developments of another 5G technology providers and innovation? And can we start to work together on the standards and the next generation technology, which we're going to call 6G or next generation telecom, which if we start now, we might be able to deploy in another 8 to 10 years. And moving on, Europe has also undertaken a strategic review of its telecommunications market, and it began in 2018, next slide, and continued into 2019, where the Europeans and the EU in particular said that 5G networks need to meet strict security requirements, that the availability and integrity of these networks is really important, and that we must ensure that these providers, both the operators of the network and the provisioners of the equipment, can ensure the confidentiality and privacy of our data as it transmits across these networks. As such, they've started to look at the dependency of the individual suppliers, and they said that each country in Europe needs to think about the strategic measures, the regulatory powers that they have in order to ensure that we have a diversity of a supply network, the sustainability of that value chain, and ensuring that the companies that currently are providing in the market remain strong and can continue to provide us reliable products, and ensure that we have a multi-vendor strategy, that you don't have one company that gets the monopoly of your overall infrastructure. They also said that there needs to be technical measures deployed to ensure that the security and resilience is built into the core of the infrastructure, which is really important because we need to ensure that the security is implemented, not it just be an option and I'll do it when I feel like it, that there needs to be security and resilience built into these networks and operators. As we move on, Also in Europe, I wanted to highlight that Germany, next slide, also did a very unique thing. Whereas many of our countries are really talking about 5G at the telecommunications infrastructure, we're also seeing 5G at the manufacturing level. And the key industrial companies in Germany, ranging from BASF to Lufthansa to BMW and Bosch, they all actually bought their own 5G licenses because they're going to have a private 5G network to help the speed and cost and efficiency of their manufacturing plants. And so it's a very interesting thing that Germany has done with their top industries is to obtain their own 5G licenses, and it's really outside of that telecommunications infrastructure. So you're seeing multiple different aspects of the deployment of 5G, the private 5G networks at the industrial manufacturing, as well as the 5G networks at the broader telecommunications backbone of the country. Moving on to the next slide, Australia was the first country to really identify the real risks of some of the 5G technology, and specifically if a company like a Huawei, it could be directed by its government to interfere with the network, there would be really no way of detecting it at the control plane or at the telecommunications level, or even by the intelligence services. And so Australia weighed this risk as being it's too high. We need to have companies that have transparency, that meet regulatory requirements, that are publicly communicating what's going on with their infrastructure and their equipment. And we need to have that transparency in order to have the trust. And so Australia was one of the countries that led the evaluation of the technology and the risk and communicated significantly to the United States of what the threats were and are, and actually influenced the United States position. On the next slide, I'm going to talk to Japan. And Japan has also been very involved in the 5G infrastructure, and they have announced recently that they're going to incubate tax incentives to spur domestic production of technologies. And they have a new market entrant that is bringing us 5G technology through cloud and edge infrastructure, which will be important as Rod and others talk about this as we move on in our conversation. That if you get a new market entrant like Rakuten that is disruptive, that could provide us another set of options that is taking advantage of this virtualized network and providing us with now a potential sixth entrant into the 5G equipment market with potentially a new service delivery area. Japan, the fact that they're doing tax incentives is trying to incubate and drive its innovation agenda and actually create a Japan national champion of delivery in this area. As we move on to the next slide, there are a number of initiatives that are underway that that we're trying to open up the innovation curve. So could we drive an innovation corridor from Waterloo down to Silicon Valley? And that would require us to open up the standards on these equipment and make an open radio access network, which is currently now a closed access network, because they're based on proprietary standards. So in order for me to innovate on any one of these equipment, I need to have an interface to their proprietary standard, which is difficult. So we're trying to get to an open standard to allow for innovation of many of our software providers and new services and things that we couldn't imagine in the past. So as we start to get that data traffic from the devices and automate that to the subscribers, you're going to see a whole new set of services and infrastructures that could be available. But I want to talk now for the next few minutes about why there is such concern about Huawei. And it really comes down to the fact that 5G is a software based network. And so at its core, we need to have good code and good technologies behind it. Next slide. So why do we worry? The first worry is that, one, we should just talk about that Huawei technology is a good technology. It's a composite of other really good technologies, because China made a decision of China 2025 that it wanted to dominate the marketplace in 10 key areas. And this 5G and the digital economies was one. Pharmaceuticals and biopharmaceuticals was another, and advanced manufacturing is a third, and so on. And so there's some state assistance with gaining and gathering intellectual property from key companies and countries. The victims of this intellectual property theft include Northern Telecom, Cisco, and Motorola. And so those technologies are embedded in some of the technologies that China and Huawei are providing. They also come with some of the same flaws that those technologies presented at the time of the theft. But Huawei's code has been noted as being buggy. Buggy meaning it has vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities because of the attention needed to do secure software development and that development life cycle. The UK has been working with the Huawei Oversight Board and its engineering processes for the last several years. And they produced a number of reports talking about the vulnerabilities and the code of the Huawei technologies. And Huawei's leadership acknowledged the fact that there were significant deficiencies in the vulnerability of their code and that they needed to upskill their workforce. Last year, as a result of that report that the UK put out, they said that they were going to spend $2 billion over the next 4 years to reskill almost 100,000 engineers to introduce them to that secure development lifecycle, to teach them how to do safe code and secure coding. And that was important step for Huawei to say, we recognize we have a problem and we're going to try to correct it. The second challenge that we have with Huawei revolves around their law. Next slide, please. And this is where the Australians have actually identified their most significant concerns, because if the law suggests that an individual or an organization must comply with the law upon direction, support and provide assistance to cooperate with the national authorities, and provide access to facilities or other assistance, that this gives us strategic pause. That it's not a company like that is publicly traded and has to be transparent and operate within the broader market aspects. That here, this company that is a state champion and national champion that's key to the China 2025 strategy could actually help and support the government. And that becomes a challenge if we can't detect it and we can't mitigate against that risk. Next slide. And then the third area that we have to worry about is that because they are a state champion and because they have been and getting assistance from the government is giving free interest loans or no interest loans, and they're assisting with the pricing of the product. And so this aggressive pricing strategy is actually undercutting the marketplace and providing a near 40% discount strategy for the Huawei equipment vis-a-vis the Ericsson or Nokia or Samsung. This doesn't comply with what we consider fair trade or the market, the free market economy. And we see this assistance as predatory and actually trying to capture the marketplace and displace other competitors in what is supposed to be a free and open market. Then finally, if you should choose a path that would take you down a path that you do not choose the Huawei technology, which is in some cases is being under consideration, again, like the United Kingdom and elsewhere. Next slide, please. Then we start to worry about the retaliatory diplomacy. We're seeing retaliatory diplomacy against the United Kingdom based on its decision to reevaluate whether or not Huawei should be phased out. And as such, then the Chinese have said, we will not bring and honor our commitment for developing and deploying nuclear power in the United Kingdom. And we're going to put HSBC Bank under investigation. In Australia, we're seeing agriculture being used as a weapon. And also in Canada, you're seeing your hogs and your soybeans used as a weapon of retaliatory diplomacy, holding your economy at risk if you don't comply with Beijing's with Beijing's wishes. So these are some of the reasons that we're worried about Huawei, and some of the reasons that we're worried about the technology in general, that we need to have security and resilience built in, and these companies need to be transparent and follow the rules of the open and free economy. But we need to also, it can't rest with the 5G. Next slide. We need to be worried about the next 10 years of how we're going to get ahead of this. If we can open up the radio access network with open standards, we can begin to innovate today and open the innovation corridor in Waterloo, in New Brunswick, to Silicon Valley, and to the other democracies around the world. But we should also begin investing in the research and development of 6G right now, starting with the standards and leading the standards development. We need to be on top of this technology, because that technology will be taking us in from 2040 to 2050 and 2060. And so when we start to think about the next 10, 20, and 30 years of our digital economy, citizen-facing services, critical infrastructures, and key government services, we need to actually be on top of the technology, understanding and ensuring its availability, integrity, and resilience. And then finally, as the last slide, I want to thank you for, and I hope that we can accelerate that journey today. And I look forward to the conversation this evening with our colleagues and as we move forward into the digital economy and enabling our future. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Melissa. It's clear there's much to consider, much to talk about. If I just think about some of the things that you covered off, obviously 5G is transformational, and it's powering new ways of connecting. It's powering new applications. Obviously, there's great opportunity here, and it's unlike what we've seen before in the past in terms of evolution of from 1G to 2G to 3G. You also pointed out that we do have a limited supply chain in terms of manufacturers and developers, but along with the opportunities obviously comes the risk, and so being able to deal with privacy, security issues, and resilience. And of course, resilience is something that we've had to brought to our attention as a result of COVID-19, and obviously it's a big part of it. And what we see here is that there seems to be various deployment models that are happening across the globe. Perhaps people are finding, or countries and organizations are trying to find the best way to develop and deploy. And, and again, it also has its upside and downside. And of course, through all of that, there's no shortage of both controversy and, of course, the politics that are involved with that. So obviously, it's a very deep and rich issue, and now I think it's a good time as any to turn it over to include our panelists and to dig a little bit deeper into the topic. And so, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our other expert panelists. First, starting with the Professor Florian Kerschbaum. Since 2017, Dr. Kerschbaum has been Associate Professor in the David R. Cheriton School of Computer Science at the University of Waterloo. He became the Executive Director of the Waterloo Cybersecurity and Privacy Institute in 2018. And prior to Waterloo, he worked as Chief Research Expert at SAP in Karlsruhe and as a software architect at Arcs and Technologies in San Francisco. Professor Kerschbaum holds a PhD in computer science from the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology and a master's degree from Purdue University. Interests lie in data security and privacy and data management, machine learning, and blockchains. Also serving on our panel tonight is Rod Wilson, and Rod is the Chief Technologist Research Networks for Sienna in Ottawa, Ontario. He is responsible for Sienna's leadership in global interactions with universities and the research community, with particular focus on collaboration with advanced high-performance networks being created by national governments for research and education purposes. Further, representing Sienna's CTO organization, he orchestrates intersections between emerging technologies and Sienna research and development groups. And finally, we have Dr. John Lindsay, who is the Assistant Professor at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy and the Department of Political Science at the University of Toronto. He is the author of Information Technology and Military Power, and editor of Cross-Domain Difference in China and Cybersecurity. He holds a PhD in political science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and an MS in computer science from Stanford University, and he served in the US Navy. So thank you very much for all of you for joining us tonight. And again, we're looking forward to the discussion with all of you. And why don't we kick things off? I'm going to turn to Professor Kirschbaum first, please. And I'd like to start with the notion that I've heard many times people say that the internet things, the times that we're living now is really going to unlock the power of the internet, is really defines what the internet was built for. And so with that, what can or should we learn from the history of the internet regarding 5G?
Thank you, Kevin. If we had an opportunity to travel back in time about 20 years ago, we might hear a very similar keynote to today's about a different technology. Maybe some of you who are in the IT business as long as I am will remember. If you use Linux, you cannot rely on your computing infrastructure because it is built using an unreliable process. You cannot rely on your network infrastructure because its software is built using an unreliable process. Some of us may remember the corresponding slogan: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Also, the claim of a parameterless network is not new. When I started 15 years ago at SAP, the company's security research strategy was the vision of a parameterless enterprise because firewalls were no longer considered appropriate. 15 years ago. The story has not changed, only the players and the technology. Let's look at what happened since then. The internet flourished, the NASDAQ rose, despite security threats such as DOS and routing attacks. The only reason we have 5G is because 1G to 4G did not fail, did not end civilization. Quite to the contrary. All of us relying on this internet infrastructure to participate in today's panel discussion. And there were pessimists even back then. 20 years ago, a hacker named Match was invited to the White House Cybersecurity Roundtable and claimed that he could take down the entire internet in 10 minutes. We all speculated that he meant routing attacks on BGP. We have the car for 100 years longer than the internet, but compared to how many times I had to jumpstart my car due to a failed battery, the availability of my internet connection is astounding. The internet is a huge success story in resilience. The internet has been designed to withstand the nuclear attack. Fortunately, it had never to prove that. Its designers, however, soon delayed security considerations for interoperability and simplicity of design. Security was seen as a service that could be added later. Nevertheless, the internet still functions today. Services such as TLS were added. Linux is better than ever. It's probably the most popular server operating system in the internet. And we still use firewalls, despite the long-standing claim that they would be useless. I'm in security research for more than 20 years now, and I've attended many seminars and panels where the biggest failures in security were debated and what could be learned from them. As security researchers, we always see the flaws and the threats that need to be fixed. It is in our DNA. I think we should start to think about what can we learn from our successes. Who in the audience is using online banking? Who would have thought 25 years ago that most banking transactions could be done from their own homes? We have minimal fraud and the benefits to customers are plenty. No financial institution can exist anymore without an online banking interface, but there are banks that exist without physical branches. TLS is another success story. It not only underpins online banking, but most of today's internet traffic is encrypted. Can you imagine how many credit card numbers would have been stolen without TLS? Recently, a flaw in the design of the wireless WPA protocol was discovered that allowed to decrypt all Wi-Fi traffic in all wireless routers. However, the impact was almost zero, since all important traffic is also encrypted TLS. A great example of a resilient infrastructure with defense in depth where the failure of one component does not endanger the security of the system. I'm not saying there is no threat from malicious components, but so far the internet has survived all of them, including nation-state actors with a their nation first policy, and security researchers have been able to develop defenses over time. So what's the lesson from all of this? Don't believe the people who try to instill you with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The internet and the civil society will survive the next technology wave despite its flaws. In fact, we're going to grow from it. I believe even if we had an all-vendor internet, the internet would remain resilient and we could run secure and trustworthy services on top of it. Let's try to build the best society and technology that we can and not be guided by fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Excellent, thanks, Florian. So yes, it's nice. It's obvious that we, there are a lot of challenges out there, but thank you for pointing out that there's tremendous opportunity. This is a transformational technology. It will empower new things that perhaps we've never even thought of before. And we have to take that attitude as we move into development of new technologies, but also take into consideration the risks that go along with it. So it sounds like we need to take a very balanced approach to what we do. Is that fair to say?
Yes, of course.
Excellent. All right, and Rod from Sienna. Obviously, 5G is something you're well positioned to speak about, and we've noticed that 5G enabled networks have been developed at a rapid pace all the way around the world, and many governments are investing heavily to stimulate development of 5G solutions. Sienna is an anchor partner in one of Canada's programs called Encore. Can you describe Encore and what is being done to accelerate Canadian 5G leadership?
Oh, for sure. So Encore is a public-private partnership really brought together by 5 anchor partners, Sienna, Ericsson, IBM, Thales, and CGI. And the 5 partners realized that together our R&D investments in 5G eclipsed $200 million over a 5-year period. And which is great from an R&D perspective, but we wanted to see some leadership flow from this. We wanted to see economic benefit in Canada and proposed a program that found matching funding from the Ontario government, the Quebec government, and the Canadian national government. And so Encore was born with a $400 million combined investment. Now, this investment was put to good use. One of the first things that was created was a testbed network, a network that had 5 locations: Quebec City, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, and London, Ontario, so that there would actually be a track fully equipped with wireless transponders, wireless antenna and transmitters, as well as a high-performance link between these sites. The infrastructure was necessary because a lot of these systems require significant increases in wireline capacity. A lot of people don't realize that there's an awful lot of optical in 5G wireless applications. Furthermore, there was a requirement to develop new techniques for automating these networks and analyzing the traffic, because all of a sudden we were going to connect billions of new devices with the Internet of Things applications that Melissa was referring to. And lastly, while we all identify wireless with our end appliances, the real applications are multi-access edge computing applications and the unlocking of fundamentally new uses of these technologies beyond simple high-performance, low-latency connectivity to our phones or appliances. And so we were very interested in creating this in this testbed, and open it up for use amongst small, medium enterprises that had novel applications, great ideas, or simply things that they wanted to demonstrate or try. And so this infrastructure, the iPass network, was born. and has been put to good use in a number of different applications. Public safety on roadways is an interesting application. Secure energy trading, so the electricity market applications are being explored. Mass transportation management systems. So these are all applications that are different from simply faster appliances. It's off to a great start. Also created through this are a number of academic opportunities and problem statements that universities across Quebec and Ontario can accept the challenge and try and find novel solutions or research. The range of grants for these activities is anything between $50,000 and $500,000. And so this has been a great stimulus to try and create Canadian leadership. I think my camera just fell over. But in any case, Encore has been a fantastic success. It's about halfway through the program. And so new challenges and new activities continue to emerge and face great acceptance among small, medium enterprises and some of the universities that are responded.
Excellent. And Rod, I mean, the Encore problem the Encore program seems fairly unique. Is it unique, or is
well, it's unique in
going around the world?
I think it's unique in Canada, but certainly what's important in the Canadian space is other governments were investing heavily in 5G application development and stimulus programs to create new industry solutions, new jobs, new functions, and new technologies. And so Canada ran the risk of simply being a fast follower or otherwise a laggard in this marketplace, and so through the innovation of the Encore program was able to catapult itself to one of the leading countries in the development of new and novel applications. In fact, it's been very successful because a number of other countries have signed memorandums of understanding or cooperation agreements in Europe, in the UK, and the US. The Encore program has created quite a stir.
Yes, and I will, I guess, a little bit of a shameless plug, but Communitech is proud to be one of the partners of the Encore program, and it's making these kinds of opportunities available to me. It's amazing what the Start and Scale community can do as they respond to these opportunities, and we have to amplify that. So it's wonderful that we can do that.
Yeah, Kevin, Communitech isn't just a partner, it's a site on the iPass network with a fully functional multi-frequency 5G antenna infrastructure in place and operational, as well as demonstration and co-development space in your offices. So a small company that has a novel 5G application that needs help and needs a kickstart to get going in the 5G world can gain access to these facilities, both technical and support and physical. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes, thanks for calling those things out, Rod.
It's a great facility. It's been fantastically successful.
Absolutely. All right, thanks for that. And now to John. I guess now we've talked a little bit about the opportunities. I guess there's obviously the threat side of things that we have to look at, and of course with the rapid adoption of this technology also comes the amplification or the scaling of the threat part of the equation. So if you could, can you speak to how are these scaled threats relevant to the 5G discussion?
Great, thanks a lot for the question and thanks a lot for the invitation. It's great to be here. So I am the political scientist sitting here on the panel. I study the dismal recurrence of war throughout many centuries of history and the effect of technology on changing that. And one perhaps bright spot is that while we have a great deal of frustrating cyber-enabled conflicts to deal with, the scope and scale of violence associated with these online conflicts pale in comparison to things that humanity has experienced and inflicted upon itself for most of its history. So this is something to wrestle with, right? How do we at the same time have the increasing potential for new kinds of conflict at greater scale, and at the same time, a reduction in maybe traditional sorts of threats? So I thought maybe I kind of position myself between Melissa's and Florian's comments. Melissa pointed out that as we scale up to 5G and we increase connectivity and bandwidth and compute capacity and the number of devices connected, we will be looking at more threats of more different kinds, right? Florian points out that we've been hearing about the risk of cyber war and internet collapse for decades now, and yet it hasn't happened. So I think the question is, why can they both be true at the same time? Because I think that they are right at the same time. And the question is, what is the effect of continually scaling up? We're looking at this massive expansion of scale, but this is not the first time that we've done that. The continents have been wired together for almost 200 years. We've had wireless radio connections for over 100 years. The internet's already 50 years old. World Wide Web's almost 30 years old. We've had iPhones for a dozen years, right? So we keep thinking of IT as new, but it really isn't. What is new is each time we scale up. And when you scale up, you put more actors into contact with one another, and you put different interests in contact with one another. You put different states and non-state actors into contact. And so the disagreements that they already had increasingly start to go online. So they're able to mess around with each other and create threats. But at the same time, if you scale up the potential for intelligence threats, you also scale up all of the classic difficulties that are associated with those threats. If you can collect more information, now you have more information to make sense of. You're bringing in all of this data. How do you also build the large intelligence organizations and the relationships with intelligence customers to figure those things out? As you go out in more places to steal more information, you're now more exposed to network monitoring and classic counterintelligence methods that have also been scaled up. So when we look at the threats getting more and more extensive, we also at the same time, through this historical scaling process, come up with new ways and means of dealing with those threats. So we interestingly kind of get this steady state of cyber threat that is always scaling up at the same time that the utility of these networks are scaling up. So Melissa pointed out that we expect 5G to bring a $13 trillion surplus to the global economy. That's a huge number, right? It's only been 15 years since economists were actually able to figure out that the internet actually did add value. Everybody suspected it for decades. It took a long time to figure out how to actually demonstrate that. The key was to look at some organizational changes. But we now know that information technology makes a lot of money, and it makes a lot of money for everybody, right? So as that's going up and the burden of threat management, mitigation, cybercrime, intellectual property theft is also going up, the business calculation that the economy as a whole is making is, does it make sense to make an extra dollar if I'm now going to have to pay a 10-cent tax on these additional threats that are emerging? So I think that's kind of the large-scale dilemma that's going on. Now, we are looking at a scaling up of threat potential. And if we want to mitigate that so that we can kind of keep this trend ongoing such that we're able to respond to those new threats with new mitigation procedures, do we need to really take radical moves to try and get this right? I guess I would submit to you that it's actually impossible to get this right. And it's impossible for the very reason that this works. It works because you get a lot of different networks and actors colliding into each other. And as they do that, they start to find new ways to use networks and protocols in new ways, right? So this is almost an inherently not quite perfect or highly inefficient system, but in a sense, that's okay. So I think I kind of want to steer this middle road and say, yes, we need to pay attention to this, But because we need to pay attention to this, I think that things are going to work out okay.
So with that then, John, I mean, when you talk about the opportunity, sort of the scaled opportunity and weighing that and balancing that against the scaled risk and the fact that it's messy, I mean, I think chaos. I think we're in a state of chaos as we move forward. And of course, the pace of technology and as it evolves and that's adopted. Are we in a state of chaos? Is it more structured than that? And are there any other options for proceeding forward, or is this the way?
You know, many people use that word. You know, Eric Schmidt famously described internet as an anarchy. You know, we had a director of national intelligence that described cyberspace as kind of like Mogadishu. I think these descriptions are highly misleading, right? The internet is fundamentally based on large-scale agreements about protocols, connectivity procedures, the disaggregation of information processing capacity, so that you no longer have actors that are having to do things all by themselves, which is the definition of anarchy. The definition of anarchy is that every actor is a self-help actor and there's no world government that they can go to. But on the internet, you have to rely on other people to help yourself, to help you on every single thing that you do, right? That's scary, so it means that there's vulnerabilities, but it's also bad for the attacker, right? Because it means the attacker is also depending on a lot of other actors, a lot of other public and private and open and closed protocols to go through and do their hijinks in cyberspace, and that means they're also exposing themselves. So there's kind of this irony, right? Because cyberspace is not anarchy, rather, you know, political scientists would describe it as a set of institutions or an institutional complex. There's a great deal of cooperation that is the condition for the possibility of conflict. And if that's true, then you need to pull your punches on cyberspace if you want to continue to have access to it. You know, and this is going to be something that, you know, every single cyber operator out there, whether you're, you know, the Chinese People's Liberation Army or the United States National Security Agency, has to worry about, right? They want to maintain access to the same space that makes money for everybody. And in order to do that, right, you need to be a little bit discreet and moderate the kinds of things that you're doing. So I think chaos is a little bit misleading. It's complex, it's messy, it's noisy, but it's the politics of institutional coordination rather than the politics of warfare and deterrence.
Excellent. Yeah, so I'll say now, maybe it's the internet's finest hour. We can only hope. Excellent. Well, thank you for that, John. And I will remember those that are on the conference call here. Please do submit your questions. There's a Q&A function within Zoom that you can click on the bottom bar. Please do submit your questions, and we'll do our best to get you to get your questions answered by our expert panel here. And while I'm waiting to get those, I'll throw one question out to the panelists, and it's with regards to the spectrum auction here in Canada. And we just recently learned that the spectrum auction, the 3,500 megahertz auction, has been delayed till July of 2021. And of course, that's receiving mixed reaction from the industry. So to that end, you know, are we rushing into 5G too quickly, or are we already too late to the game?
Well, if I gauge this against what's happening internationally, we're not too late at all. If Canada wants to be a leader with these technologies, we have to respond very, very aggressively. We have to stimulate new applications and new use cases around this technology. 5G in of itself is simply an enabler. And if we don't take advantage of what it is enabling, then we'll simply be buying other people's products forever.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
I think it's going to be important to really have a spectrum strategy in order to enter into the spectrum auction. And so right now we're talking mostly about a terrestrial-based 5G network space, but Canada is a very large country with areas that potentially some of it will be too expensive to deliver some of this terrestrial-based 5G infrastructure. So there could be a way to look at the spectrum strategy for delivery of 5G from space-based assets. So you can access some more of the, I would say, the remote territories and provide that economic opportunity. So having a thoughtful spectrum strategy of when and how you're going to auction for what purpose, and for really kind of what industries I think will be important. And then, you know, just to build on what Rod said, it is going to enable that, you know, the competitiveness and the innovation. So having that all thought through of how it's going to contribute to the digital economy, how is it going to dovetail to the research and development strategy, to the competitiveness and innovative strategy. It's really got to be an all-encompassing thing, just not thinking about spectrum for spectrum's sake or spectrum for 5G. It's got to be spectrum in the broader sense of the broader economy.
You know, it's interesting to note that SpaceX has just launched an inquiry into spectrum allocation for their Starlink services. The issue of Canadians' digital divide, the huge geography that we have that's not serviced by any respectable broadband technologies, is a significant factor. Even though Sienna's expert at building out optical infrastructure, it's not possible to build optical infrastructure to the far north where huge territories are so sparsely populated that it can't defend the investment. So creative uses of available spectrum for other applications are important. But the you know, the key here, of course, are the benefits and opportunities created by 5G. And 5G is, at least by current definition, somewhat geographically limited.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And we've got questions here, and we're running out of time, but we hope to at least get to one question here. So the question is, as use of digitally based technologies continues to grow and scale, what particular sources of threats and vulnerabilities are likely to emerge and become more important? Today, human vulnerabilities seem to be the biggest failing. Might the activities of state actors or criminal elements grow proportionally in importance? John, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. I can take that. So another one of these myths of cyber war was that the increase of connectivity was going to empower hackers and criminals in weak states. You know, you'd be able to reach behind the might of the U.S. military and collapse critical infrastructure. All sorts of bad things can happen. It was kind of this myth of non-lethal strategic bombing, if you will. And I think, in fact, what we've seen is exactly the opposite. States that are already strong, that already have very robust intelligence services, have benefited tremendously from these capabilities, not just in targeting other states, but in targeting civil society. We just completed a big study that looks specifically at the reporting from information security firms, looking at what kinds of threats that they were talking about. And for-profit information security firms talk a lot about threats to states, really, really sophisticated threats, but they talk very little about the threats to civil society actors. So journalists, academics, activists, human rights organizations, NGOs. And yet when you look at the reporting from not-for-profit organizations, you see that there is this tremendous amount of activity that is focused upon these actors. Now, these are actors that are not able to pay for the services of large information security firms, right? And they also are not able to adopt the defenses that they would need to protect themselves. And yet they tend to be on the receiving end of military-grade cyber espionage and reconnaissance software, right? So, so I think that the effects of scale, if you think of cyberspace as an institution, scaling up that capacity is going to tend to scale up the power and the enforcement capacity of institutions. And so I think we're really, the largest threats in cyberspace are less to nation states and kind of military disruption and all that familiar story, and more kind of the encroaching surveillance state that has the capacity to enforce its domestic politics, but now on a global scale.
Excellent. And maybe I'll just, I think we're just out of time. I don't know if one of the organizers, if they could tell me if we've got time for one more question or not, perhaps through the chat. As always, the time goes by way too quickly. All right, the word is we've got time for one more question. So the question is as follows. Everyone appears to be concerned with the activities of actors that are working in their own interests as opposed to the interests of network users. For example, violating privacy for national security interests. To what end do you see new cryptography standards or smart contracts as remedying this? For example, use of algorithms applied over homomorphic encryption to identify fraud or criminal transactions. Takers on that one?
I can take that one. Indeed, what we need to do is we need to develop a security in-depth strategy. And if we would have homomorphic encryption that would be fast enough for all applications, it would solve a whole bunch of problems. But unfortunately, we don't. So we can only phase in these types of technologies step by step. And I'm actually working hard on making things such as cryptography work. Smart contracts are another thing because they introduce distribution, similar to things like secure multi-party computation, where you can have distributed computations and can distribute the trust between different players. So these things can work, but they are expensive. And we have to balance them against the threats. So I actually want to make very similar points to John in the sense that from a technical perspective, we have to rebalance threats and opportunities all the time. And we can introduce these things once after the other. I gave the example of TLS and WPA, but there are other ones. Homomorphic encryption is definitely another one that we could employ. But there are many more opportunities that we have that we do not rely on a single component failing anymore. And the internet is definitely in its design capable of doing this. It is just a question of, do we want to afford it?
Excellent, thank you. And again, unfortunately, we're running low on time. So I would like to ask each of the panelists, and I'm going to have to be fairly strict with, 1.5 minutes or less, if you can just provide some concluding thoughts as we wrap up here. And we'll start with Melissa.
Well, thanks, Kevin. And this has been a great conversation. I think that one of the things that we really need to, I think, deeply appreciate is that we need strong leadership in the digital age. And every part of our life is becoming digital, and you can no longer be digitally ignorant about what are the investments that are going to be needed in order to drive the economy through innovation, and what are the things that are going to be needed to ensure its resilience. I think over the last 100 days, while we've been working from home, we've seen what the opportunities are for the technology. We've transformed our businesses and the like, but we're also starting to see some of that fragility. And so we need to have leaders who are going to fight for the next generation standards, that are going to demand the next generation technologies from the innovation corridors, and that are going to ensure its resilience so that we can, in fact, deliver critical services to our citizens, protect their data, and drive our future.
Excellent. Thank you, Melissa. John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to say a quick couple of words about China, since that came up briefly during the talk, and when we're talking about Huawei, that's unavoidably in the background. And I just think it's really important to appreciate that so much of Chinese innovation policy in this area is driven by a mix of admiration and paranoia about the United States, right? China looks at the United States and says, okay, you built the internet, you had Microsoft and Google. We would like to do that because we think that's what it means to be a great power. And at the same time, China has been very much aware of how vulnerable it has been to exploitation by the United States, right? So building Huawei is maybe part of that answer, but that's going to be a mixed blessing for the Chinese, right? If you just look at that scenario, scenario and think about Microsoft. Okay, Microsoft cornered the market on operating systems and productivity software. It's all over the place. Great win for the United States. And at the same time, we now have Microsoft vulnerabilities all over the place, right? For the past 20 years, cybersecurity has largely been about debugging Microsoft. And the US government itself has suffered tremendously from what it has created. Let's keep in mind that Mr. Snowden has let us know that the Americans have been very interested in penetrating Huawei networks, because as Huawei networks become diffused around the world, those are potential intelligence targets at risk, right? So as Huawei, if Huawei is successful in its bid for 5G network effects, it will open up as many vulnerabilities to China as it creates advantages. So again, this is that same familiar offense-defense arms race that's always going on in China, going on in cyberspace, and I think will continue to play out in this realm. So this will continue to be complex and messy, but I just don't expect a clear-cut advantage for China in this space, even if Huawei is more successful than it looks like it is going to be right now.
Okay, thanks, John. And Florian.
I just want to say one thing. In the end, there is one thing to remember. Security is a race to the top and not to the bottom. Security is like running from a bear. One does not have to outrun the bear, be it a country, be it a company, but only one's competitor. The weakest link is what's exploited by the attacker. However, all competitors have to run to not be the last and be hit by the bear. We are slowly picking up speed and making progress as a society. The day when everyone outruns the bear is far, but we are making progress every day.
Excellent. Thanks, Florian. And Rod.
Success of 5G will depend on the creation of safer, secure networks. And secure networks involve overall end-to-end architectures that are resilient from one user or one application right through to the other end. And it's more than just being resistant through encryption or other cybersecurity, but resilient, so it's always up, so it can flow with the load, and it has to be available so that network services and the functions that machines or applications require. It has to be trusted. If we're going to use 5G to create the next generation of the economy, industry and users have to be working in an environment that's fully trusted. So network devices are fully identified and controlled and configured. So I guess my last word on this is the success of 5G depends not only on the wireless part, but overall high performance, safer networks.
Excellent. Thanks, Rod. So thanks to all of our speakers. Again, this is a conversation that could go on for much longer than this. We've uncovered a lot of interesting topics. Clearly, there's a lot of questions yet to be answered, but I think having a dialogue like this helps us to appreciate points of view and to understand the challenge, but also the opportunity that faces us. And I think I like the notion of, taking advantage of the opportunity, going after the opportunity, but being mindful of the risks that go along with that. So again, thanks to our keynote and to all of our panelists for participating. And with that, I'll turn it back to Laszlo.
Thank you all. So on behalf of the Canadian International Council and its Waterloo Region branch, we'd like to thank our panelists very much. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Rod. Thank you, Florian, or should we say Dankeschön. Thank you, John. And of course, thank you, Kevin, very much. This has been a wonderful panel. And we also like to thank our attendees. Thank you so much for your patience. And we hope to see you at our next event. Before closing, I'd just like to mention our partners, the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa, Julia Rogers and Kate Brown, thank you so much. Communitech, Kevin, thank you very much. And the Canadian Digital Media Network. And with that, once again, thank you so much, everyone. Have a pleasant evening. Thank you.